If you want to read better and think more clearly and understand the ideas shaping our world, then this might be for you. You should join the Dr. John Patrick Book Club. It's a private online community where we read great books together and learn how to think, not just what to think. Inside, you're going to have access to Dr. John Patrick as we work through books and ask questions. If you've ever felt like there are books you should be reading or ideas that you want to understand better, but you didn't want to do it alone, this is a good place to start. You can find the link in the show notes or the description below to join.
Hello, everyone, whoever that is. As you can see, it's a grey morning here, but warm. We've not been visited with extreme weather, except pretty hot, but not very hot, not like Europe. So, thank you for people who responded to me this week, which were a couple. Always leads to interesting conversations. Now, continuing the promise I made to do the next bit of the Sermon on the Mount as the opening each week, the third Beatitude is Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. The word meek we get into trouble with because we're deep down in our background, the Christmas carol, gentle Jesus, meek and mild. And Moses was meek too, but we don't see that neither Moses nor Jesus was in any way a pushover. So that's the problem that we face, that we don't understand the word. And in due course, I did find out what the word meant, courtesy of Dr. Barclay, who has multiple commentaries, but is a wonderful word scholar. And the word we use, meek, is, what should I say? It's nothing like what it was used as in the time of the writing of the New Testament. And Barclay is an expert on street Greek, and he says the word meek is used to describe a horse that is broken in, trained, and is now ready for battle. You get the picture. You are meek when you've seen and faced the truth about your inner soul and all its problems, that you are beginning to learn the practice of serious repentance, which is going to be a lifetime habit, hopefully, until that day when we see him and we shall be like him. The way in which life changes after those first two steps changes who you are. You see the world in a different way, and you see yourself in a different way. Paul ultimately puts it thus, he says, the life that I now live is not mine, but Christ living in me. That's an incredible statement. Christ living in me. That's what he says he wants to do, and he does do it to you in his own inimitable way. So you are meek when you wake up in the morning and you work your way, as I hope many of you are beginning to do every day. It only takes a few minutes, but it structures your day, and you get to this, blessed are the meek. Just think of yourself as the horse, trained, broken in, ridden by Christ, who is going into battle today. Does the horse have any big ideas about what the day should be like? No, not really. That's one of the things that should be put aside. The only thing that the horse has to do is be obedient to the nudges of the rider. Horse and rider are one, and the horse is obedient. We have no idea what's going to happen, but we do know we are ridden. We're not alone. This particular thought about the Beatitudes probably comes back to me in conversation. It must be very close, if not number one. People who begin to realize what an incredible privilege it is to be able to say, Lord, ride me into battle today, especially in a world that's deeply into anxiety and all sorts of other problems, which we'll get to later. It's interesting that this particular beatitude comes up at the time when I'm rereading The Crisis of Liberalism by Michael Bonner. And hopefully by the end of this podcast, you'll see why. So, in a chaotic world, we are not part of the chaos because of who the rider is. Nobody who's not an idiot can look around the world today and say, we're really doing well. We humans know how to run the world. We don't, do we? War, famine, extortion, slavery, sex trafficking, child trafficking. I mean, the end result of legalizing homosexual marriage, inevitably, is they demand children. They can't make them. So now there's a trade in children. It's not good news. And the Canadian Social Statistics Organization, I always forget its name, has actually done a survey of outcome from the child's point of view of different forms of parental relationship. And lo and behold, a mum and a dad of the ordinary, traditional, rather boring sort is the best deal for the child. The worst is two mums. We haven't got enough data yet for some of the categories, but single parents and homosexual dads are sort of joint second. But nothing comes close to a heterosexual relationship. And of course, throughout the Western world, we need children. And as for having large families, that's entirely a heterosexual thing in our world. We desperately need the church, in particular, to encourage particularly women who are so undervalued, and they try and deal with that by competing in areas where psychologically they're and sometimes physically and sometimes even mentally at a disadvantage. I mean, men are, insensitive brutes in some ways, but they do respond to challenges in an incredibly good way. I mean, it's fascinating to see all the World War II stories that are coming out at the moment. For some reason, I don't know why, but they are incredible stories. Particularly how the Canadians who signed up for World War II when Canada's population was only about 11 million, performed incredibly well. They were the first across the beaches. They got further inland than anyone else. They were by far and away the best infiltrators behind enemy lines. Because, of course, a lot of the kids came from relatively underprivileged backgrounds. Canada was a very young nation, and if you were out in the prairies or in northern Ontario or northern anywhere, you had to hunt. So these guys came, and they knew how to move without being detected, even across an open field. And the stories, particularly one Aboriginal infiltrator, nobody else could come close to him. But they'd learned to hunt. They knew even in an open field, it's never flat. You learn to see a few inches is enough for you to crawl through without being seen. If you go very slowly and you only move when the wind blows, you can get up to the point where you can take down a deer or whatever. And certainly you can get information on the exact location of everything on the enemy's side without them knowing. There are accounts of people being within 10 yards of them and not seeing them because they were so good at camouflage and about remaining entirely still when it was appropriate to be so. That's what the culture produced. So now we have a world which is driven by technological warfare. And of course, what the Ukrainians have done with drones is reshaping everything. Meanwhile, the technology on the American side is finding ways to disable drones. So the battle will go on. But it's not happy, is it? Many of the people who are doing the negotiations don't seem to understand that the Koran teaches Muslims that you do not have to keep your promises when you're dealing with infidels. Read What Went Wrong, Bernard Lewis's little book from around the time of before 9/11, pointing out that the West doesn't seem to understand that the Muslim world has always pushed until they're stopped. If they're beaten, they back off, but they don't intend to stay backed off. They really believe that they are meant to rule the world. And they're told in the Koran that lying to an infidel in order to advance the kingdom of Allah is perfectly okay. So how do you negotiate with people who have that view of truth-telling? There is one primary idea, and that's what you have to deal with now. You see places like the Scandinavian countries, France and others are saying, enough, we're not having any more. I think there's a turn taking part. I mean, only very liberal people running an immigration system would not fail to read the book that is at the heart of the people they're interviewing and then take the difficult passages like the ones that legitimize lying and murder for the advancement of the kingdom. They don't have any problem with that. But they do really believe that they are the last word from Allah, and they're going to rule the world. Douglas Murray's response is brilliant. He says, if that is true, how come that in 13 centuries you really made no huge material contribution to the world? You don't make anything of any significance. You haven't produced scholars of great significance, and those that were of the greatest significance had to get as far away from the mullahs as they could. No, there's no evidence that what you are told is true is actually happening. And I personally am on the side of the people who say that Islam cannot stand the critical attack that is going on. It will not last to the end of the century. Islam is facing what Christianity faced in the 19th century, which is an intellectual attack on the basis of Christianity in the 19th century, largely pressed from a reductionistic German philosopher point of view, and it did a lot of damage, but it also made us rethink, and Christianity is growing again, especially amongst young men, but amongst the young, and especially in those that take the faith seriously in the original sense of what it meant to be serious. But we'll get to that more in a moment. So the political chaos in the world is obvious to everyone. And the question is, do we have the will, the wit to deal with it? I think ordinary people, especially where I grew up, I'm watching what happens there. I mean, part of Birmingham, where I grew up, has just declared itself independent. So we don't want to pay taxes. Of course, they want to use the health services and everything else. But they say they're under Islamic law. Now, no serious state can accept that degree of civil disobedience. But at the moment, they're still trying to shuffle around it. It's interesting that the current Home Secretary in Britain is a Muslim woman who doesn't wear a veil and is suggesting that one of the things that could be done immediately is to have a new category for people coming in, a provisional entry, whereby they're documented and can be found. And if they show that they are integrating, paying taxes, contributing, then they can go to the next level. If they don't, no, they go back. That's a Muslim woman, Mahmoud, worth looking at her. So our world is in all sorts of disarray. I mean, even the Jewish culture, which is doing so well in terms of science and engineering technology, but most of them don't go to the synagogue. They're necessarily patriotic because when somebody attacks Israel, they've got nowhere to go. They're going to fight to the death. And they're having children, 4 on average. The only country in the Western world doing that. But their faith is not working for them in the way that it used to. It's not turning out to be the center of their lives. And secular Jews in particular have major problems. So that's the world. So how come that the Western world flourished in the way that it did? I mean, the students are got at by the studies programs and the victim status. They shout colonialism without even stopping to think. Fortunately, some honest black scholars are beginning to push back and say, look, be a bit more sensible. South Africa being the classic example. Some 35 years ago, the horrors of apartheid came to an end. And not only did they come to an end, but government was handed over to the ANC. And in 35 years, they've taken South Africa from being effectively a first world country in terms of technology, economy, all those things. Now they're all falling apart dramatically, and the only thing that's growing is corruption. Obviously, some people are beginning to say enough is enough. We need to take this seriously. So there is pushback from the amazing thought that blacks, they have, for instance, elected a white mayor of Cape Town in the past, and she's now running for the biggest city in South Africa, where she was born, Johannesburg, to see if she can do the same there, to make the sewers work and the water work and the electricity work, etc. The practicalities. Hopefully she will do that. We'll see. It is going to be extremely interesting. But Frank Zanu, who's a black intellectual, born on the West Coast, educated in the United States, an American citizen, I think, is now back in Africa and pointing out to them, look, you need to look at the data. When the colonists arrived in South Africa, there were no roads, no railways, no schools, no hospitals, no legal system that worked on a national basis. They provided all those things. Now, you push them out, and all those things are falling apart. Colonialism has always happened. You want the colonists just to be the white guys in the 18th and 19th centuries who established empires around the world. But I mean, the Brits were traders. Most of the Western nations were traders. They wanted a trade system, spices to begin with, but other things afterwards. But saying that they took our minerals, what do you mean? You never dug anything out of the earth. They would remain there forever. They weren't actual wealth for you. Now, if governments are stable, there would be agreements. That's always been the way. Look at how well the Arabs have done by actually, they were forced to, but I mean, the oil was on the surface of the desert in places. They didn't know what to do with it. The Western world did that because its understanding of the world was different. Now, the liberal elites in our world want to believe that you can have a form of liberal democracy that goes around the world. And at the end of the Cold War, I mean, Bush Sr. said, we're on a whole new world. And they were naive about saying it was all due to the form of government. And of course, That hasn't worked, has it? It's not due to that. And now I think around the world, there is a recognition that we need to think more deeply about the conditions which were necessary for the amazing development that occurred in the last few centuries. I mean, the economic change in the world is absolutely astonishing. But at the heart of the banking system, and I didn't think about this till Ferguson made me think about it. Fundamentally, it's an act of trust. You go to the bank, you put some money in a machine, you get a bit of paper back. If you did that in Russia after the wall came down, with the Western banks, you could go and get your money, but with the Russian banks, they went bankrupt very quickly and took the money with them. No trust. Christians couldn't run their own banking system for 1,000 years. The Jews were the only people who had been inculcated since the Ten Commandments, basically. They had a 2,000-year history of you ought not to charge interest at all to your brother. To outsiders, you may negotiate with them, but you must keep your promise. If you agree to a certain level of interest, you do not take 0.5% more. They understood that. They worked it through. And that, of course, is at the basis of banking. It's got to be honest and straightforward. No corruption. Now, when the world fell from that metaphysical world, let's call it, everybody believed there was a God. The Jewish God had made particular commands. All gods made particular demands. Then when the scientific technical revolution occurred, religion got pushed sideways because it looked as though all you needed to do is forget about everything else, forget about moral facts, just measure things. And of course it worked dramatically. Inductive reasoning, which is the heart of experiments, no doubt those in the university of a more liberal mindset intuitively know that inductive reasoning and thinking is going to force some thinking they don't want to deal with at all. They want it to be deductive. From your brilliant ideas, you deduce what happens and test it. That isn't the way it happened. It's a lie. So, why did the West succeed? Now, the book that I was talking about last time, and I'm now going to talk about again now, Bonner's book, The Crisis of Liberalism, is what's going to help us. Now, I know that a considerable proportion of the people who listen to this podcast are involved in the medical world. So, and you can do the same thing in any specialized area. Think about the changes that have occurred in the last, since the end of the Second World War, actually since the 1960s. So we may get to that in a little while. I don't know whether we will or not. We'll see. Already too much time has gone. But in the medical world, for instance, we have seen a total change in the pattern of causation of disease. There was very little when I started in medicine. I was a medical student in 1958. So I qualified in 1963. In those days, doing internal medicine, there were very few patients who came to see me who felt in any way guilty for what was bothering them. The only things they felt guilty about were alcohol, excess, infidelity and sexually transmitted disease, and stupid accidents. I mean, smoking was just becoming something that was wrong and you ought not to do, but it was peripheral. Everything else was without guilt. Now, any practitioner, particularly, say, in a city with an unstable population that's living on the edge, but not only them, across the board, we have guilt, we have anxiety, we have sexually transmitted disease exploding, and the world pretending it's not happening. Divorce, families falling apart. And that has ramifications in the health area. I mean, the single best indicator that I'm aware of for a cheap family in terms of lifetime healthcare costs is a letter from your priest or pastor saying you're in church 3 Sundays out of 4. Because that identifies you as belonging to a group who has some community, and a community, if it's a half-decent church, with some moral standards which you can talk about. It's not doing a good job of that, and we need to do a lot more. Certainly when I went to Africa and realized that a pagan society couldn't do any of those things because they're totally tribal. We're going back to tribalism. Islam is effectively tribalism. And tribalism can't do these big things. Doesn't happen. So, I mean, university at the moment, it's memorize and dump. It's continuous evaluation, which is entirely the recall of facts, which are measurable things. No assessment of whether the students are learning how to think, which is what surely that's as a minimum you want to see a higher level of thought. I changed my teaching of biochemistry in the 1990s because I realized that it was being reduced to a memorize and dump process to a very large extent. And cheating just cries out to happen there. And certain subgroups who were more computer savvy than others come to the top by cheating. And they didn't even feel guilty about it. The most hilarious one I discovered was an engineering program that introduced an ethics component. And the students hacked into the ethicist's computer, so they knew what his outline looked like, and they could pass the ethics exam. Not what we want, is it? Lectures on ethics may turn you into an amateur ethicist, but it won't make you ethical. Mom and dad and the moral consequence of family life as it used to be, that produces it. Ethics without the people who are practicing them, even knowing the name of ethics, they certainly couldn't define it. Where I grew up in a working class environment, there was not a man there who could have defined ethics in any reasonable way. But they lived ethical lives in many respects. Because until 1960s, the Bible was read in church every day, in school every day, and they had retentive memories like all kids in those days before they were contaminated by screens. So they don't read books, but they had one book read to them for 12 years sometimes, 10 years in others. So the only book they actually know, without even knowing that they know it, is the Bible with its injunctions. That's gone. Great societies must have a great book. There are only half a dozen that matter. The Book of Nature, Animism. The Old Testament, Judaism. The New Testament, Christianity. Islam's takeover of that text, Islam. Hinduism goes back much further, but it is an inward meditative world. The aim is to get out of this life having lived as well as possible so next time you come back in a better state. I mean, that view of the world actually makes it irrational to treat a poor person, because if they bear their sufferings with equanimity and courage, their life will be better next time. If you take that opportunity away, you're taking their future away from them. And Buddhism, of course, is incorporation into the nothing, ultimately. Yeah, what you believe matters. That's important. And those are the stories that you have to choose from. And you don't have a lot of difficulty. Once you know what someone truly believes, it also tells you much of what they will be like. I mean, the ordinary world after the resurrection quite quickly could say, these Christians, Christ ions, for those of you who are scientifically orientated, people whose lives are orientated and attracted towards Christ, they love one another. And of course, if you're in church and you believe it, you have a better life, not necessarily financially, because the big winners there are, basically they're gambling and they win and they manipulate the terms of the game. The World Economic Forum is held together by its hypocrisy and wealth. They push carbon nonsense on the rest of us, while they themselves meet every year in Davos and they fly individual jets. What kind of carbon footprint is that? And that's only the beginning. Fortunately, I think that particular nonsense is dying too. So there's hope. But the world in which I trained had little applied science. So in medicine was an old tradition, and it was validated and honored for what it knew in terms of being able to tell patients what they had to deal with. We had no effective treatment really until the 1860s. I usually say, quoting from Bad Medicine, forgotten the name of it now, David Wooden, who said it wasn't until the 1860s and the advent of germ theory and the killing off ultimately of the humours approach and the beginning of epidemiology, but things began to change. A couple of 100 years, but my goodness, look what's happened. The economy also was beginning in that time. Even at my time, working class was poor, but stable, ran its own activities, didn't divorce, had diminishing numbers of children. Is he points out what is at the heart of the success of the Western world. Medicine is one example, engineering is another. You can go through it. And you see the bad side as well. Many companies were destroyed in Britain, while a few people who knew what was happening made money out of it, but they destroyed the income of ordinary people. Look at what's happening to Jaguar now. But the Mini was made by Alex Isigonis, a few miles from where I grew up. The Mini just about broke even during its lifetime, but it was a brilliant piece of engineering. But the economists came along and they cut the quality of the materials, and it's destroyed the British motor industry. Even Jaguar, that made the XJS, is falling apart now because it's run by economists instead of engineers. There needs to be much more input from the people at the blunt end in every area. What happened in the Western world depended upon things that cannot be proved. That's the really important thing to get straight. After the Second World War, scholars realized, smart scholars, that they couldn't rationally defend the things that made the Western world possible. They were beliefs, not logical deductions. And what were those beliefs? They're very straightforward, really. They just look at how we're doing. The first one is that we're created. I mean, the instinct to believe that there is a creator, that somewhere, even in animistic paganism, local things are under the influence of evil spirits, but they believe in a distant creator who doesn't love us very much, if at all. But you can't say to somebody in the middle of a rainforest who's an animistic pagan that, oh, this is all time plus chance. They say, no, look at it. Psalm 19 is the classic, where the psalmist looks at nature and then looks at the inner nature. That's what happened after the Second World War, where scholars said, what we want can't be derived from a tacitly atheistic world. Doesn't logically follow. The Darwinian world cannot produce morality. That 19th century move. Darwin was a great biologist in many ways, but he wasn't above supporting his own theory. I mean, the opening chapter of The Origin of Species is about the number of different pigeons that can come from the rock pigeon. But he doesn't make anything of the fact that that was done by human breeding, not by natural selection in nature without any help. And we have bred animals that produce vastly more milk or vastly more wool or vastly more meat by careful breeding, always with consequences. The mongrel survives bad times more easily. I mean, when these silly people go and liberate rats from laboratory, there's no way they survive in nature. As for letting cows out who will die in excruciating pain if they're not milked, the fact that we allow our emotions, what we feel should be the case, to dominate without really any necessity to think through it more carefully. So back to this realization that the university education system was going apart. And cheating was subtle, clever, and I couldn't catch it. So I had to ask myself the question, what can I teach these kids in a way that is not susceptible to cheating? What I realized is they didn't know how to read. That we don't teach reading anymore in the real sense of what happened when you understand the beauty of some writing as opposed to others. I have no gift for languages other than my own. But I understood and could see what people who knew multiple languages could bring to a discussion. My first homeroom master at high school spoke 5 languages, and he could introduce them into scripture lessons, which he also taught, Latin, which he taught, and English, which he taught. And one had a sense of what it was to be really educated. And I knew that I was not going to be educated in that way. I met a few polymaths along the way who could do that. But they're very rare, and they're not usually honored as much as they should be because they set a standard that the rest of us can't reach. But we were taught how to argue, how to defend a position. We had to be able to do that orally. We don't do that anymore, not for everyone. Learning to know when something was proved and should therefore be believed. Underneath that idea is the fact that there is such a thing as truth. But in a Darwinian world, there's no truth. There's only reproductive advantage. Truth is a casualty. And we end up in values language, a gift of Nietzsche. Your values, my values. No objective moral reality. Gone. The question is not whether what I did was right or wrong, because those are just categories that don't really matter. My grandson going through the legal profession says, oh, the law is purely procedural. He knows it isn't. Law is essential. The Western world has been a law-driven system for hundreds of years. Darwin undermines it. Now, it's only reproductive outcome, but since we're not reproducing, it's only outcome for me. If a lie will serve, why wouldn't you do it? Particularly if you're a Muslim and you're told to lie to the infidel. Not good news. But we used to believe that there is a God and that we are made in his image. An incredible thought. This is a God who has no body. He is pure spirit, as Jesus teaches us. So the image of God we have is something immaterial. Our ideas of truth, justice, love, honor, these don't have any material existence. They're material expression, but they exist independent of that expression. Fidelity, honesty, love. When you realize that all the things you value most you can no longer defend, there is a problem. In the postmodern scourge of getting rid of all these things and looking upon everything as the exercise of power, which is clearly not true. You only have to sit back and look at the people who had the power to defend themselves, and they gave their lives to defend something that didn't exist in material terms. Israel shows it amazingly. I mean, when Israel is attacked, people go to sign up to fight. They don't have to be called. You don't need any bureaucrats. They will go because it's an existential crisis. They know that. But the people who came from rural Canada to fight in the Second World War, why did they do that? No conscription. They signed up. It's saying something about human nature that's really important. So, shortly after the Second World War, scholars were saying that, we can't actually rationally defend the things that matter most to us. Frightening. We're fussed with equality, but that's a very post-Christian idea in the way that it's expressed now. Aristotle had absolutely no time. Of course we're not equal. Slaves are born to be slaves. They're certainly not my equal. We credit the Greeks as being the source of our democracy. Get lost. Yeah, there are some things that were going on. A few men who had wealth could be democratic amongst themselves. Come on, that's hardly our democracy, is it? But you can't derive our democracy from physical facts. We also, because the story taught us this, although we're made in the image of God, the capacity to understand abstract things. Animals have only instincts. We have duties and we know it. So that's number one. And number two is we screw up with monotonous regularity. And even in church, you get people who think that what they do is what matters primarily. No. It's when you try to live the life of a disciple, you can sanctify even little acts of goodness, but little acts of goodness in their own right do not produce the perfection that's needed if heaven is not to be a repeat of earth. Jesus says to the disciples, to the Pharisees in Matthew 5, you can keep all the laws you do. They're good, they have their function, but they will not get you into heaven. Not, they might, will not. because it's perfection that's at stake here. And that has to be a gift. The resurrection happened. We know that. It's one of the most well-attested events in history. And the fact that it changed the world is around us everywhere. Our language, you look, nothing else has come close. But there's no basis for equality there except the equality that comes from being fallen sinners. We know what is good. That is not our problem. We know when we're doing wrong. Children know it. They know when they're being treated unjustly, not fair. It's usually perfectly valid comment. We know. Animals struggle for it. They're Darwinian, but we're not. We're not instinct-driven. We can allow that to happen. We have biological drives, but we have to master them. And with spiritual help, that can be done, and it leads to a better world. So the fall is an essential doctrine. So creation, fall, these are not acceptable to the modern liberal. Equality, even of outcome, that's nonsense. It's clearly not true. We are not equal. We're made different, and some people have some skills and some have others. You can't have affirmative action for the Olympics, can you? You can have a Paralympics to take a subset. We divide male and female, or at least we did. Yeah. Some divisions will remain. There are very few women who would survive being in a scrum facing the South African team at the moment, for instance. It wouldn't be a good idea at all, would it? Reliability. If it's only personal values, you can't really judge what someone is going to do until you know what their objectives are. But if you know that they believe in ultimate judgment, and if we all accept, which I think we do, that we know what is good and we know what is bad, evil. We know those categories are real. Our problem is not information, knowledge. It's the will. Our will is deformed. Paul puts it beautifully in Romans 7. Put it on if this is new to you, put it on your computer or whatever until it really soaks in. The good that I would, the good things I want to do every day, the good that I would, can't do it. I don't do them. And the bad things which I promised me, like New Year's resolutions, I'm not going to do anymore. I fall. The fall is the next foundational reality of Western success. And when that is well developed, it's a check. You don't assume that everything is right. You want some evidence. You start looking. You publish your results, other people do it, and then they find out that you are screwing it up in some way or another. And that's got much worse in the recent past, because when I did a PhD, I stepped out of the mounting the ranks in medicine, and that meant actually loss of income, not gain. But I didn't see it that way at all. I wanted to understand something better, and I had some modest success. And certainly for my family, it was superb. We didn't think about cheating, because when I started in scientific medicine, you took a loss financially. Now, of course, there's vast amounts of money attached to particular sorts of results. And you can be cynical enough to say, some of the cheats are, they say, well, if I cheat and get this published, I'll get a postdoctoral position, I'll get national status. They add up the positives, say it's worth doing. It'll take 10 years to prove that I fabricated this data. Read the John Darcy affair in the New England Journal 20 years ago, Darsee. Just read the whole story and say, okay, what he did was rational. People wanted to say, yeah, they say he cheated. Yes, he did, but he was rational in the way he did it. If it's a trade-off, why wouldn't you do it? So that diminishes reliability. The new head of NIH, what's his name? Keep losing his name, which is terrible. But he's determined to try and do something about the fact that the vast amount of published results in the scientific literature has no repeats. If something is published that has real implications, there must be other people doing the experiment. And he's trying to put up a system whereby we could pay young scientists to do that, where bringing someone down will actually help. But more than 80% of the literature has never been replicated. And what proportion of that is fabricated? We've no idea. The only time you know is when, as I had the privilege of being involved in developing a new technique, and then shortly afterwards one saw people publishing data allegedly using our technique, but with precision that we knew was not possible. They were washing their data before they published it. They couldn't do what they said they were doing with that methodology. It worked, but it had to be done in appropriate statistical ways. But nothing was done about that because you couldn't prove your assertion in a way that would bring them down. So it just went into the process of destroying the scientific community, which used to know and trust one another. Now, that's foolish. We can't go on in this way. Reliability inevitably is one of the casualties if there isn't an immediate measurable outcome. The third thing that we all believed and we can't prove is true, and in many ways what we say we believe would not lead to this conclusion again, is that we have free will, that we are responsible. Yes, we fail, but we know we made the choice. We are freely choosing. But then we had to start thinking about that. And Paul says, who's going to get me out of this hole? And his answer is very straightforward. And again, even Christians misquote the response. It says, if you put to death the deeds of the flesh, you will live, Romans 8. Except that isn't what Romans 8 says. It's if you, through the Spirit, put to death the deeds of the flesh, you will flourish. That's much more nuanced, much more difficult. Leadership in a world that has those Christian understandings should belong to the people of character, people who have proved that they are growing in reliability, in honesty. Not people with the most degrees. Character should lead in every institution, particularly the church. You hire skill. That's a different world. Probably enough trouble for you for 1 week, right? Think about these things, because these are the things we have to talk about. If we can't talk about how we got the things that we treasure and what they are dependent upon, we're in deep trouble. And when the world goes bad, it's always our fault. When the salt loses its savor, it is good for nothing except to be cast out and trodden underfoot of men. When we are no longer salty, preserving what is good, destroying what is evil, we're not fulfilling our role in the world. So when the world goes bad, which it is, in many ways it's us wanting to be nice when we need to be truthful. God bless you.